I did some research. Was it 3 generations that Beverly-Grant has been
Yeah.
family owned? That is so cool.
Yeah. That's
And
cool that you looked into that. Yeah. Alan and I started working our way into the ownership side of things about 11 years ago. And now we're the two, folks in charge, and that makes it official with a third generation company. And I haven't done research in actual case study of where this has happened, but I've heard across the board that family owned businesses tend to fail in the third generation. So when I've heard that, I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's like this other layer of something that, we want to be successful, but we also almost feel like this burden of proving that apparent statistic wrong. That,
Mm,
we can do this. This can be a third generation of success, and maybe even a fourth if it makes its way to the kids.
mm, absolutely.
And frankly, Caden, one thing that came to mind, I think that sometimes is why generational companies fail, because in the corporate world, the person that's in charge is just whoever the best person is for the job. And then when that person retires, the next best person comes along. In a family business, a lot of times, whether they're cut for it or not, the next generation steps into the family business, and they're not
Mm,
the skill set and the personality to manage a family business, and they're set up for failure right out of the gate.
yeah. And as the vice presidents, you and Alan, what does an average day look like?
Sure. So when you mentioned that we might talk about what do you like about what you do, one of the things I love about construction and being an owner and a vice president of a family owned business is there aren't any 2 days that are the same. There are points in time within a given month that I have to do the same thing that I did last month with financials and accounting and things like that. But um, today I'm dressed in a untucked shirt and jeans and sitting inside watching it snow. Had lunch with a subcontractor who brought lunch in to our company and we had done work with them in the past, and they went through an ownership transition and started not performing at the level we needed them to, and they're wanting to repair the relationship. And so I was in that, and now I'm on the Zoom call with you talking about how I've ended up here. And so um, being a family business, when I was a project manager, so if you work your way up for the most part in any construction company, and you want to be in the management side of things, you're probably going to start in the field, and then you're going to work your way into the office. And then eventually, instead of managing projects, you're going to be managing people that manage the project.
Mm,
So that's kind of been my progression. So now, I mean, as vice president, there's days where I might be overseeing the project management staff and reviewing their estimates, reviewing their billings. And there's days that I'm dressed to impress, and I might be in front of a school board convincing them that they should hire Beverly-Grant to build their next school. Or I might be on a business development trip and golfing out in California or something. And so no 2 days are the same, and I would struggle with monotony.
mm. And would you say this side of business is exclusive to Beverly-Grant, or is it a broader strokes
Yeah,
across the
that's a
industry?
really good question. I think no matter what type of a construction company you go to work for, if you're trying to go through the project management route where you're managing the projects versus being in the field managing the work and things, um, the same is true. I mean, at my staff, we've got 11 project managers, and there's days that they're at their job sites all day long, meeting with people, talking about the schedule, talking about the budget. And there's days where they've got their door shut and they're sitting in their office, and they might be approving invoices and doing estimates all day and everything in between. So I think that's something specific to the construction field. If you're in the management side of our field, you're never going to have 2 days that are identical.
Mm, hmm.
And there's some people obviously that don't like that. If you do like it, then this is a great uh, path to take for your career for sure.
Managing civil engineering, being the vice president, what are some of the cons?
Sure. So in the early part of my career, when you're just a project manager, what I'd disliked the most was the stress of every day when you show up to a construction project. You're a manager of the process. You're relying on people to do what they say they're going to do. And so it might, if the framing contractor says, I'm going to be ready to put drywall in the building next Monday. And then you go and based on that information, you tell your owner, good news, we're going to hang drywall Monday and we're still on track to move you in 3 months. And then all of a sudden the drywall guy doesn't show up or something goes wrong. And it's one of the things I love, but also hate about the project management side of it. When you're the one in charge, you get a lot of credit when things go well, and you're also you feel like you're on an island when it's not going well.
Uh,
And so I did well with it. I tend to thrive under high pressure and things, but the nights where I would go home and look at Cameron and just be like, I don't know why I do this for a living. This is miserable right now. It would be on those projects where we were behind. I was being blamed for it, which rightly so, because I was the manager of it, and I was trying to do any and everything I could to get the project back on budget, back on time. So it's not for the faint of heart, so to speak. I mean, there are stressful days in the life of a construction manager. And then now that I've gotten more into, the ownership role and managing the people and the business side, I think about the only thing I just hate is just all the HR stuff that goes along with owning a family business. And I would love to just not ever have to deal with another HR issue again and just everybody do what they say they're going to do and be happy. And, when you're in charge, a lot of people come in to talk to you about things that you didn't know were going to come up that day, and you have to drop everything you're doing and deal with it. So,
and yeah, the leadership position. I was asking Tucker because I was asking Tucker if he had any, because I told him I was interviewing you. He's like, "Oh, that's so cool." And he was wondering if you thought that generally, if everyone has capabilities for leadership, or if some people are more suited towards
right.
other roles.
So that's a really good question. And I would have answered it differently 15 years ago. I would have probably told you any and everybody can do anything they set their mind to. And there is still a lot of truth to that. But we went about, I'm looking at maybe 8 years ago or so, we went through some leadership training it was a mediated process where we hired a consultant and they took us through some leadership training, and we did everything from focus on individual leadership skills and also setting company level goals and things of that nature. And one of the things that came out of that process was a personality test. And so we all independently took a test, and this particular one, and I can't remember the acronym, but you had like 4 letters at the end of the day, and it told you in 4 different sectors of personality what type personality you were. And no surprise, I know you know it, but people that are watching would pick up on pretty outgoing guy and don't mind talking and telling stories and things like that. And so no surprise, I was an extrovert. I love people. I like the business development side of what we do. And I've never met a stranger. And then one of my best friends at NC State is now one of our senior most project managers. He's been here for close to 10 years. And he is very, very good at being a project manager. And naturally, when someone's successful at their position, you evaluate whether or not they should do more than that. And I actually approached him one day, and we learned he is very introverted. He is kind of a lone wolf. He will do any and everything you ask him, but he doesn't necessarily need a team around him. He's like, man, if I can go dig that hole over there, why would I ask somebody else to do it? I'll just go dig the hole. And, that is a simple example, but that, at a macro level, that's how he is. And so we asked him, just for an example, hey, would you ever want to just manage people, be, the manager of all the project managers? He was like, man, to be honest with you, unless that's something you need for me to do, I feel like I can be just as successful for you and therefore myself. Just give me more projects, give me bigger projects, and he'll reach the same level of success from a financial and a career standpoint, but he won't necessarily be a leader of people. He'll be a leader
Mm.
on his project. And so I do think everyone has the ability to lead within what they're doing, but I don't think everybody's personality is such that they need to be in charge of a bunch of different people, or a lot of people probably have the skill set to be president, but they would fall all over themselves in a debate. It's kind of the same thing. So I
Mm.
think you can always be a leader in what you're doing, but being a leader of the company takes a certain skill set that you may not have.
Absolutely.
And frankly, Caden, one thing that came to mind, I think that sometimes is why generational companies fail, because in the corporate world, the person that's in charge is just whoever the best person is for the job. And then when that person retires, the next best person comes along. In a family business, a lot of times, whether they're cut for it or not, the next generation steps into the family business, and they're not
Mm.
the skill set and the personality to manage a family business, and they're set up for failure right out of the gate.
Mm. That makes a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
thank you for that connection. Absolutely. That makes sense that like choosing it based on family versus choosing it based on skill would often lead down that path. And so for someone who for a young person who wants to get into engineering and who is interested in the management side of things, what advice would you have for them? I know we've kind of touched on it,
Yeah.
but if you were talking to young Chris coming out of college, what would be the major thing you'd advise
I
him?
really think so. So again, Tucker's a great example of it. You can have a career in construction without going to college, and Tucker could end up being if he chooses not to go to college and continue on the electrician part, he could end up being the field manager for all the electricians at some point. So I think the key, and Tucker's already doing it, and I mentioned that I was fortunate enough to be convinced to do it, is get the education that you need in the classroom, whether that's going to college or qualifying for being a licensed electrician and having to take that exam. There's certainly a book side of it, but find a way to get real world experience. And I'll tell you what I really wish I could have said to myself, and I ended up just fine. But that real world experience is the minute you're old enough to have a job, even if it's as you did, being a lifeguard or working at a coffee shop or just at an early age, somewhere where you have to work and you have responsibility, but you're also rewarded for doing that. And it's
Mm.
not your parents giving you an allowance. It's the Starbucks manager saying you work 20 hours this week and you make $10 an hour. So here's your $200. I mean, I think that creates a foundation. And then as you do decide what type career you want to get into, figure out a way while you're doing the classroom stuff to get real world experience in that career. And you may find that you hate it. My wife, Cameron, she straight A student all through college, thought she wanted to go to law school, interned at a law firm for a summer in Raleigh before she would take the LSAT, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, there's no way I could be an attorney. This is miserable."
Mm.
And she ended up being a school teacher. I mean, how far is that from being an attorney? So real world experience may actually cause you to change your mind and what you want to do, but if you don't have that real world experience, you never get there. So even and have the courage to change your mind and go with your gut. I think it's some other pretty good example. If I hadn't done that I might have ended up at Chapel Hill with a business degree and never stayed together with Cameron and all the other intangible things that have gone on in my
Mm.
life. But I kind of had the courage to go away from what I thought my goal was as a young teenager of attend Chapel Hill, major in business, go work for my family business on my dad's side. That would have been a totally different life for me, and maybe it would have worked out, but that's not what my gut was telling me, and I chose to go with my gut, and it did pay off in the long run.
Like, what would you say is your definition of success?
Yep. Um, So I think, and it's easy to say, anybody that you talk to that's a successful entrepreneur, they're going to have some level of financial freedom. Um, so it's once you have that, it's easy to say money's not the only thing that's important. That is an important aspect of it. But my definition of success is I have the opinion that if you're a good entrepreneur, the financial success is going to be there, and that's an
Mm,
important role. But it's not the definition of success. Success is whatever your community or your scope of influence is what you're doing and the people that are working around you. Is it a lasting legacy? Are you making them better? Is your community better because you were in it? All of those things. um, I think especially once you've started to achieve the financial side of your career and that's starting to get under control, and now you're in the kind of mid part to latter part of your career, focusing on, yeah, the financial is important, but now I have a responsibility to the people that work under me and around me to make them better and enrich their lives and enrich the lives of the community that you live in. And that's one of the things too that I'm thankful having a family business. You certainly get that in the corporate world, but knowing that everything we do is in Western North Carolina and seeing the community side of things benefit from it is real rewarding too. So,
mm, yeah,
but
absolutely.
if I, when we're all dead and gone someday, does somebody look at you and say, "Man, that guy made a ton of money," or do they look at you and say, "You know what? He was really successful financially, and look at all the other things unrelated to that he chose to do because or she chose to do because they had that financial success and they put it to good use."
Hmm. Like going above and beyond.
Sure. Yep.
Mm. With everything that's happened with Hurricane Helene and running a contracting business, construction business, um, how has that affected Beverly Grant?
Yeah. So um, we actually, I'm trying to think, we probably have at least five, maybe six individual jobs. And to put that in perspective, we probably do about 40 to 50 jobs a year. So 10% of our typical volume is flood repair that,
Mm,
what is it, 4 months ago, we had no idea was even going to be here. And so Alan and I pretty quickly, when we knew that the devastation was as broad as it was going to be, probably a week or so after the storm, after we got our personal lives stabilized, we said there's going to be a lot of work and there's also going to be a lot of people that need help. And Beverly Grant needs to take an appropriate level of responsibility on both sides of that. We need to benefit from it financially. And this actually kind of goes back, I didn't mean to, but it's a nice tie in. Goes back to what I was saying about being successful. We said, look, we need to profit from this. There's nothing wrong with making money from all these repairs, but we also need to help where we can and should as
mm,
well. And so that's been a lot of our, October, November, December, on into the first part of this year after the storm is helping people where we can, benefiting from it where we can. And the coolest thing is the staff that works around me. It's like created this energy where I would venture to say, and at some point it's not sustainable long term, but we're probably operating at 125% of capacity right now. Everybody's just
whoa.
still energized by, we can do this. Let's band together and take on more work and help more people and rebuild all these things. And I think the holidays were kind of that everybody saw the holidays on the horizon too, and everybody took a
Mm-hmm.
big deep breath and was able to relax during those. And I don't know if we'll be able to continue operating at that level coming out of the holidays, but it was really neat to see everybody band together. We're fortunate enough, the building we're in, we're the only office. Everybody else is a medical user, and so we have a full generator on our building.
Oh,
And we
wow.
also have an underground fiber internet service. And so when everybody was without internet and without power, our building had both. And so we had Manna Food Bank, which is a big nonprofit in the area. They came and worked out of our office.
Mm,
A company called First On Site, which is a big national level restoration company that goes in and cleans up the mud and the water and all that from flooded buildings. They set up shop they kind of set their hub up in our office, and our insurance broker was in here. Our attorneys were about to come in here, and then they ended up getting power. And so it was kind of neat to just, how it is, like when you're around a project and everybody's just wide open, kind of crushing it. And there was an energy to be had from all of that for a little while. So that's the show. We did some of the cool things. We rebuilt Asheville Christian Academy. So they're
Oh, that's
200,000
awesome.
square foot school. The entire first floor had at least a foot of water in it. And they actually went back to school Tuesday of this week. So that's one of the
Whoa.
bigger community ones that we did. And we're doing a lot of work in Biltmore Village and some other areas. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
I feel like that's something that I've noticed, and especially I've researched Beverly Grant a little bit for this interview, but you guys do such a good job of like being an Asheville company. Like it doesn't feel, it feels like a personal, uh,
Yeah.
the things you do for the community, like building, the college in Asheville, and
Yep.
then repairing Christian Academy, and then you guys built another middle school. I think that was a couple years ago, and then also the
Yep.
Cherokee Center. Just like doing these things for the community
Yeah.
definitely feels like it's
And
unique to Beverly Grant.
that's really, that does two things. I really appreciate, it humbles me to hear you say that and to be proud of what you researched and all of that. It also, there's a marketing side of that too, where it's kind of the humble brag, so to speak, of we
Mm.
want people to know that that's the type of company we are, but how do you do that without it looking like we're the best thing ever and we're better, which is not really how we roll either. And so
hmm
some of it has just been side effect of how our personalities are. Once you want to be that way, you tend to be that way. But there's also been some intentional marketing behind some of what's out there and consumable in the public eye, of making sure people know we're not just a general contractor in Western North
mm.
Carolina trying to make as much money as we can. We give back to the community. We build lasting community projects. And that was one of the things I jotted down in my notes. I think what makes me the most proud, whether it was when the kids were little or as they're approaching teenage years and college years, is driving around and I'll hear, it used to be me telling them when they were little, hey, your dad had a part in building that. Now we're riding around and I'll hear them say to one of their friends, my dad's company built that. Or I did the coolest, probably my favorite project ever was building Max, Annalie, and Mia's school. I see Imagine. And over the course of that project, all three of them had that kind of prideful moment where they were like, my dad's helping to build this school. And I always
Mm.
smiled and said thank you. And I was also quick to remind them, your dad is managing the building of the school, but I didn't drive a single nail and I didn't do that. And we got to make sure we thank the people that are actually doing the work, because that's just as important as managing it.
Mm. Absolutely. And then the most important question for the entire interview
Oh boy, and no
is
pressure, right?
no pressure at all, but a lot is riding on this. I heard NC State
Oh
had
gosh.
six wins to seven losses in football this
Uh,
season, and they lost to
what in the
the
world?
Pirates. Oh
What in the world
man.
happened? I know.
What would your advice be to the NC State football team? They got to get their act together somehow. I
This is a
mean,
big. You may share this on social media so that it makes its way to the coach. I got plenty. Um, it's funny. There have been much more instances of NC State losing than winning since I decided to go to school there. Um, you obviously went to one of the highlights of NC State the last 4 or 5 years, was that game
that was
you joined us
amazing.
with at Clemson. That was so much fun. I think my advice, trying to draw a line with what we're talking about here today, is learn from it and don't repeat your mistakes.
Mm,
That's why I try and tell myself, my staff, everybody, you can either be defined by 6-7 record and become that and never be anything else, or you can say, you know what, we know what that feels like. We don't like how that feels, and we're going to put in the work to change it. And maybe that change is 7-6 the next, season, and you slowly build. But and then the other thing I would say, and I think it's the nature of money and sports and all of that. I know your dad saw a lot of it. People are just constantly focused on instant success, and it is just
Mm,
not how sports work. And I'm a sports guy and draw a lot of analogies to the corporate world and sports. I think the reason we're not seeing legacy professional and college teams anymore is because they're constant. The kids are just leaving the schools and going to a different one, going to where the grass is greener. And what I think that shows, and it's applicable in the corporate world, is if you have constant turnover, whether it's coaches, players, or in the case of corporations, it's leadership and employees. I promise you, if there's constant turnover at any corporation, they are not successful. They might enjoy success every now and then, but
mm.
they're not going to, be the equivalent of winning 10 championships in a row. And so I think that's some of what, we put a lot of pride in trying to make sure that we have the same staff and that nobody leaves Beverly Grant and that we don't have a lot of turnover. And most of the time when companies can pull that off, they're successful. And most of the sports teams that are successful have seniors on their team that have been there 4 years. So
Mm.
anyway, not to get on a soapbox there, but there you go.
It's what the
But
people
yeah, it
needed.
was it was a tough season in football for sure. And basketball is not looking a whole lot better, but
Oh man.
it's okay.
What was your inspiration for pursuing engineering going into college?
Yep. So interestingly enough, and you just had never heard this part of the story. So I obviously we went to the same high school. TC Robertson still does a good job, and back when I was there, does a great job of preparing you for college. But it was also, and maybe we can get into this a little later. I don't believe that everybody has to go to college to be successful, or even should go to college for what's most successful for them. Back when I was growing up, you were like viewed a failure if you didn't go to college. And I think there's still some of that now. But not only did Robertson, they prepared you well, everybody at Robertson, I can remember the counselor saying to me when I was a freshman, well, if you want to get into Chapel Hill, this is what class you need to take. And these are the where you need to volunteer. And so frankly, a large focus of mine, my dad had a business. He had his own business. I, at the time being young, thought the easiest way to success would just be, well, I'll just work for my dad. I worked for him all through high school, and that's what I was going to do when I graduated, but I still needed to make a showing, go to college, get a business management degree, and then still come back and work for my dad. And so when it got to the point of the college application process, I applied to 3 schools. I applied to App State, I applied to NC State, and I applied to Carolina. Got into all 3 of them. Chapel Hill was the one that I didn't know for sure if I'd get in there or not, but that had been my dream. I mean, I grew up a sports fan and a Carolina fan, and obviously feel completely different about that school now. But when I got in, my parents, all of us thought, oh my gosh, you got into Carolina. That's what your dream was. That's where you're going to head. And I don't know if it was my parents or myself or my friends, somebody thankfully influenced me to go down and do like an acceptance visit to both schools. I had friends at both schools. I'd spent plenty of time at both schools, but more so socially than actually considering attending class there. And when we went and we visited NC State and we visited Carolina, I just got this feeling of NC State's where I need to be, the type people that are there where I need to be. And they actually did not have the better business school. So Chapel Hill's business school, very, world renowned, all this stuff. And it was a really strange decision to make, but it just deep down, and I think you've probably been faced with decisions like this too. And you're like, where it's like, this might feel like an off the wall decision, but this is what I feel moved to do. And my parents empowered me to make the decision that I thought was best. And that's how I ended up at NC State. So my freshman year at NC State, I was in business management. My girlfriend at the time, who obviously now as my wife, Cameron, she was at Wake Forest. And I made straight A's, and I literally spent probably as much time visiting her at Wake Forest as I did attending class at NC State. I had a great freshman year, thankfully made good grades. But at the end of that year, I was kind of like, all right, you've had fun, you got away with it, you made straight A's. But if you graduate with a business degree from NC State, and there's all kinds of people coming out from schools that specialize in that, you're going to be overlooked. You're not going to be competitive. And so
Mm.
I was evaluating what can I change my major to, given that I'm in an engineering school that does not depart from my. I'm a people person. I enjoyed aspects of English and writing and things like that, but I also loved math and recognized that I could do well in engineering. And so there was a degree at NC State within the civil engineering department called construction engineering and management. And I was like, oh, wow, this is the best of both worlds. It's basically a business management degree, but it's through civil engineering and construction. And so I just walked over when I was done with all my exams my freshman year to the civil engineering department, and the head of advising at the time was in there. His name was Dr. Bingham. And I politely said, I was like, hey, my name's Chris Smith. I'm a student here, just finished my freshman year, and I need to switch to civil engineering. And he just kind of laughed. He was like, you don't just switch into civil engineering, especially if you're coming from business. This is a different world. It's much harder. It's much more rigorous to get into. And I was like, well, I made straight A's. I don't know how you can do any better than that. And I had done well on some of my AP classes with calculus and things. And I said, I placed out of calculus. I don't even have to take that. He's like, you didn't place out of engineering calculus. And I was like, okay. So he said, I'll tell you what. He said, you did make good grades. I think you're going to be shocked at how hard engineering is. And I ended up pulling that off. And that was kind of the long-winded version of how I ended up in civil engineering specifically, but still with that management focus. So obviously went on to graduate from NC State, and I can get in at an appropriate time to how I eventually ended up where I'm sitting today. But that was kind of the core decision, I think, was, the root of growing up, knowing I wanted to manage business and be an entrepreneur like my dad at some level. But then it was really somewhat an unconventional way, and I don't give myself credit at all for ending up in civil engineering. It just kind of, because of the school that I chose, that was the best path for me to be successful graduating from NC State. So,
Wow. Yeah. I had no
yeah,
idea that you started out as going into business management
yeah,
versus just straight engineering.
yeah,
Um, but absolutely, I do want to segue into how you ended up going from transferring to business management to civil engineering and now to being the vice president of Beverly-Grant. I'm so interested in hearing what your journey was, especially getting out of college, like after you'd completed those classes, what
sure.
were the hurdles you faced?
So I think one of the biggest hurdles that any college student faces is college is important, or some equivalent of this kind of phase in your life of, I'm no longer a high school student. I can take care of myself. I'm legal in the eyes of the government, but you're not quite, don't take offense to this, but you're not quite matured enough to where you're like, you got everything figured out and you're ready to be a 22-year-old either. And so college was that kind of maturity kind of opportunity for me of learning how to live. First load of laundry I did was when I got to NC State. I'd never done a load of laundry. First meal I cooked was like my junior year at NC State when I finally moved off campus. And so a lot of college, in my opinion, is just growing up. And I think that's a challenge of folks that do want to immediately get into the workforce. They do still have to find a way to also learn how to be an adult, learn how to go from, a high school environment and all of that to eventually, having a job. And so I think the biggest challenge with that is, for me, it was important to learn a lot of what I learned at college. I needed to learn math, and I needed to learn especially like the construction specific, civil engineering specific skills that I still use today. But where I learned the most, hands down, and I think a lot of people in totally different careers will tell you the same thing, was the real life, on the job training, so to speak. So I'm a firm believer of, if you're not entering the workforce directly from high school and you're choosing to go to some type of higher education, figure out a way to get real life experience while you're there, whether it's what you're doing now, where you're doing podcasts and things like that, and drawing from other people's knowledge, or able to work an internship, even if it's not in a field that you think you're interested in, just that real life experience and learning how to ultimately have a career and work for a living is really important. And NC State, that's kind of one of the things that they pitch to their students. So they're
Mm.
very understanding. And I actually had the requirement of having what they call a co-op, a cooperative education, where they basically, I was able to do it over the summertime, but they would allow, if you want to take a fall semester, to do a co-op where I would have gone and worked for a construction company instead of attending class. They
Whoa.
allow that, and you're still a full-time student, and you get all the benefits of being a college student, but you're actually working, and it's typically a paid position too. I was in Raleigh after my sophomore year. I wanted to try and find a job with a construction company, and I was a little behind because of the transfer. Not all the classes I took my freshman year transferred into civil engineering credits. And so I didn't want to take up like a fall or spring semester doing a co-op. So I decided to accomplish that over the summer. And frankly, I just got lucky. There was a highway construction company. They were doing a large $200 million highway project in Durham, North Carolina, which is just 30 minutes away
Whoa.
from campus. And so a buddy of mine in civil engineering had interviewed with them, and they said that they would hire them, but you got to be at work at 6 a.m. and you stay at least until 5, and you might have to work weekends. And he was like, that's not for me. And I said, man, my parents, I got to get a job. I don't care what it is. My parents said I have to get one this summer too. And I said, I'm going to give me the guy's name and email. I'm going to reach out to him. So I reached out to him, and he said, I loved your friend. His name was Jay. He said, I loved your friend Jay. He said, what's your GPA? Is it similar to his? And I said, yeah, I had like a 3 point whatever. And he said, look, he said he came over here in a coat and tie, which is fine. He said, put work boots and jeans on, come over here. You can ride around with me for 2 hours on the job site. And if you like what it is that we're doing, you can work here this summer. So I did that, ended up getting the job. And I actually ended up, from that point on, I stayed employed with them all through college. They were a large company, and they always needed young talent. And so they had no problem keeping an intern, so to speak, on their payroll, even when I only worked 10 or 20 hours a week. I started to realize what it took to be in construction. And not even, there were times where I would show up and I was flagging traffic, the guy that's got the stop, start, paddle. And obviously that's not what I do for a living now, but that foundation taught me that two really important things. One is you got to work hard, and sometimes you got to put long hours in. Sometimes you're getting up at 5 a.m. when all your buddies are sleeping. But it also taught me, even though I don't flag traffic anymore and I'm not a person that's digging a hole or anything like that, it taught me that the only way you're successful as a construction company is to have people that are really good at that and are willing to do that. And they're just as important to the process of building a road or building a structure as the guy that sits in his office and is in charge, so to speak. So I think that gave me a place of humility and being humble, knowing that I've been as successful as I have been in this business, but I also recognize, and I can say to the people when I see them in the field, like, man, I was one of you. I used to be in the ditches too. I used to work there. As I was approaching graduation, they said, there's a place for you here. You're the last semester of college. I only had to take, I think it was like 12. I had just enough hours to be considered a full-time student. So I
Mm.
went 4.5 years because of the switch in majors. So I had plenty of time to also have almost a full-time job. And so by the time I graduated, when I came to work the day after I had my diploma, I did the same thing that I had done all summer. And so it was an easy thing for them and me to just say, why don't you come to work at Granite? And at that time, so I'll tease where I'm going with where I sit now. So I had Cameron and I were getting more and more serious, and we ended up getting engaged and married the last semester of my college. So I always knew in the background that my father-in-law owned a construction company, but it was a small local company in Asheville. And Cameron and I didn't know if that was the life we wanted for ourselves, to live in a small town and to be, work with her dad and be around family all the time. We adore our family, but we also wanted to create some independence. And so I liked the idea of working for a large company, and the sky was the limit of how far I could go within the structure of they do about $2 billion a year, and they're publicly
Whoa.
traded. And so I could work my way up into a management position and make really good money and not own my own business, but kind of be my own person within the structure of that business. And Cameron's dad called me one night, and he said we had talked about the possibility of me moving back to Asheville and going to work with him. And I was literally on my way to night shift. So in highway construction, a lot of times you have to work at night because of the road work and the traffic being less.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I need to hire an assistant project manager. He said, I'll be honest with you, you'll probably have to take a pay cut, but I think the future is bright here for you. And are you interested? And I said, Rick, I'm literally on my way to have dinner with your daughter. I've been at work since 6 o'clock this morning. It's 7 o'clock at night now. I'm going to see her for 30 minutes and then I got to work all night. And I was like, I'll come tomorrow. And we kind of laughed, and he knew I was joking, but I said, I do think that
Mm.
I'm ready for a change. And one of the things, and there's people that love this and people that wouldn't like it. I fell into the wouldn't like it category. If I was going to stay with a big company, they only do big projects, which means you're constantly moving. There's not $200
Mm.
million highway jobs in one area for your entire career. You're going to have to move around the country to where those jobs are. So the day I turned my notice in, they said, does it change your opinion of this if we told you we were about to promote you and move you and I was going to be put on the job where there's an interstate that actually goes directly into Disney World and a
Whoa.
big road system. And they said, we were going to move you to Orlando. You're going to get a promotion. And I was like, man, I'm about to move to the mountains and enjoy that climate. I was like, yes, it does not change my decision. Last place I want to live is Florida. This just makes me feel better about it. And those guys, I still keep in touch with all the mentors I had at that company.
Mm.
So long-winded version of that's how I ended up at Beverly-Grant. Unfortunately, not long after I came to work here, I came in December of 2004, so call it 2005, coincidentally 20 years ago. It wasn't long after that we had the recession.
Mm-hmm.
And so right about the time that I was at the point where I was going to assume a leadership role and really start benefiting on a financial level from all the hard work that I'd put in and starting to be a little more in charge and just be a project manager within the company, the recession came, and we went from the sky's the limit on what my success is going to be, especially on a financial level, to taking a 10% pay cut, having to lay people off for the first and only time in the history of our company, and wondering. I literally sat down with Cameron at one point during all of this and said, there's a chance that we might have to pack our bags and move to Charlotte or move to Atlanta or call Granite and say, is there a way for me to plug back into your corporation and move wherever we got to move? Because I don't know if we're going to make it. And obviously we made it. Coming out of the recession, I will tell you that what that did for me, I mentioned earlier about being humble, about having come from the hourly worker side of construction, but I had started to get complacent that the work's always going to be there. The money's always going to be there. As long as I just do a good job, I don't have to worry about business ever going away. And it all went away. And literally in about a 3-month period, I think our company back then was doing about $20 million a year. And we had like $10 million worth of work just get canceled. It wasn't given to someone else. They said, we can't build this right now. And so coming out on the other side, the whole what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, coming out on the other side of that, all of a sudden, I think I've got a much better frame of mind to know that it can disappear like literally overnight. 3 months in the corporate year is overnight, you know. Our volume now is like 5 times what it was then, and I think that's because there was a lot of luck. You had to be in the right place at the right time, but we also were equipped with the capital means and the skill set to take advantage of that opportunity. It wasn't just going to fall in our lap. The ingredients were there, but we still had to be smart enough to cook them and come out with a cake, so to speak.
Uh
You
huh.
know?
Right. Exactly. I really
Yep.
like the it's really inspiring to hear your transition from going from granite and having a stable job and choosing this new opportunity to be closer with Cameron and your family, and then having it all be taken away, like having gone through all that hardship just to come out strong.